Snaps give us the ability to use elements in our scene as anchor points to snap to. This means we can use geometry, helper objects, 3ds Max grids, and more to help us carefully and precisely craft and build our models and environments. Let's take a look at how they work. By making use of our snaps.max scene loaded, we have in our scene a very basic 2D layout plan for an environment house mockup that we want to build. We have in this scene that we want to learn starting from the use of the 3D Studio Max grids. We are going to use some of these tools down here. The snaps toggle. We can toggle the snaps on and off using the shortcut key S. So notice when I keep pressing the S button, it will toggle it on and off. If we right click here, by default 3D Studio Max will set the snap setting to snap to grid points here. And in doing that, we can also decide, let me just expand this view, we can also make changes to the snaps home grid here. We can make it bigger or smaller simply by changing the numbers. For example, I'm going to change the grid spacing to 100 and major lines every nth grid line to, let's say, 20. You will find that now the grid configuration changes already. Before we proceed, let me introduce to you some of the helpers that we can employ. I'm going to turn off the snap settings first. Let's go to Create tab and let's go to Helpers and let's look for Point. With this, we can place a helper object, which is a point here, that could help us prepare a point that we can snap to. The very useful part about using the point is when we activate the move command, you will notice that here we can begin to put in the set of coordinates in the XYZ space. So what can happen is we can type in pretty precise numbers, for example 90,000, and we can begin to control the location in both the X, Y and the Z coordinates here. So again, I'm just going to put it as 25,000, for example, here. And given this way, we will be able to place points accurately in spaces in the scene. We can either use it to draw that we can snap to, or use that as reference points that we can snap to, this way. Next, I'm going to show you how to use the snaps. Starting with, let's try by using the basic grid snaps. So I'm going to activate the snaps toggle and right click to call out the grid and snaps setting dialog box, and to make sure I have got the grid points activated here. I do not want to use too many because it will add to confusion and it makes snapping to a particular object difficult or inaccurate. With this, I'm going to work on the tree here. So I'm going to select this tree and I'm going to make copies of the trees to the points designated here. This way. So I'm going to hold the shift key and begin to drag the tree to the point here. And with this, I am working in a clone command mode. So with this, I'm just going to use copies, and it will get us to specify the number of copies needed. So in this case, we will put in 3 copies needed, and we will click OK. Notice now it will be copied along the points that we have set up for. Next, I'm going to show you how to use the snaps other than the grid mode. So what happened is, I'm going to right click and turn off the grid points snap, and instead this time round I am going to turn it to endpoint snap. And with this, I will use the select and move command and select the cube. So notice, once I mouse over the geometry, the endpoint snaps icon will be highlighted here. So I can just drag it, and notice here the snaps will not work here because there is no endpoint to snap to, compared to here, for example. But I would like to snap to this point. So what should we do? We can hold on to the shift key and then right click to call out the snaps menu, and with this we can go to standard and look for pivot here. And once we are done, we can release the left click, and you find that we will now be able to snap to the pivot here, this way. I'm going to repeat the process again. So I'm going to use the snap point first, and once I'm close to this point, I will right click to call out the standard pivot, and then I will release the left click and mouse over the point reference and click on it again. So same thing here, and hold the shift key, right click, standard and pivot, and then release the left click and click on the target point. And one last time, shift, right click, standard, pivot, and click on it again. This is how we establish the plinth. And lastly, I will move the house to rest on top of the plinth itself, this way. So again, I will use the endpoint snaps and click and zoom closely. While holding on to the left click, I can actually use another finger to press onto the middle mouse button that will allow me to navigate, as well as to roll the middle mouse button here so that I can navigate and zoom closer to see where I need to snap to. Because I have the endpoint snaps on, I will be able to snap to the plinths quite easily here, this way. On top of snapping to points during moves, we have also options to allow us to prepare an angle snap toggle. So we can right click on it to prepare the constraints for a particular snap angle that we need to do. So by default it is snapped to 5 degrees here. So I'm going to turn off the snaps toggle now and activate only the angle snaps toggle. And I'm going to use the select and rotate command here and select the house to be rotated. Now notice when I highlight over using the Z-axis to rotate, it is in yellow, and notice each time I turn this on, the Z-axis angle changes with an increment of 5 degrees every time. So we can keep doing this, and the rotation will be snapped to 5 degrees interval at all times. This is how we can use the snaps toggle effectively. Although we have used a pretend set of instructions for our scene, it is not uncommon to have these kind of guidelines when working in the 3D industry. As we have seen, snaps can make adhering to such instructions a fairly simple process. Even if we are working on our own projects, oftentimes the use of our snapping tools will add a level of accuracy and professionalism. The placing of objects by eye simply will not do. And finally, and most importantly, a huge benefit of using snaps along with some fixed measurements that we have seen demonstrated is the speed with which we are able to set up our scene. Snaps are definitely a tool that we want to make good use of.